A very warm welcome to all of you at our China Lunch series. You are at sort of TU Berlin and at the China Center, and my name is Sigrun Abels, as I think most of you know already.
And hello, my name is Tanja Becker. A warm welcome also to my and Mark's students, the participants of our course, China, Climate Change as a Challenge, as an Opportunity. This event is a part of the seminar in which we deal with the consequences, but also with opportunities of the current climate change. So welcome to all of you, and welcome to our guests from China.
Yes, I think most of you really know what the China lunches are about. I just repeat that we deal with important issues regarding China and urbanization, climate change, and the influences on our lives, especially in the lecture today. And today we will be traveling to, I think, northwest China, to Xinjiang and to Berlin-Brandenburg as well. And why do we call it China lunch? Because normally we meet in a seminar room. Maybe you remember we did this almost 3 years ago now, and had a little lecture, had some discussions, and then a nice lunch together. We switched that to this online format. You know why we did this. And today the recipe of Professor Martin Welp, which he sent us, was cold noodles with Sichuan dressing. I don't know who of you tried to cook this. So we decided to still offer this China lunch series in an online format, so that has the advantage that like Ahmadjan and people, friends from us in China, can participate. So it's not only a disadvantage. And what Urbanics is, I think you know that already. The project is running for 5 years already. We are running until the end of next year, hopefully. Got funded from the Ministry of Education and Research to do this, and build a network of German and Chinese friends and colleagues, where we are now. Paul was in the video about above 1,000 people, right, that are in this network, and some of them are here, so I'm very happy. To the team belongs Dr. Tanja Becker, Paul Hoffmann, Ms. Zhou Haomeng. She is on holiday, on vacation today, and we will have a Chinese assistant joining our team, following Kim Bese. But she is in the process of employment, and her name is Dao Zhiyu. Now to our friend Martin Welp. Tanja will introduce you a little. We know Martin since a few years already. We've been to Beijing together in 2019. You have been to Berlin to our Urbanics workshop. What else? We met in Bochum last year, November, when there was a little time window of meeting, actually, physically. That was nice. And you are a TU Berlin alumnus. You've been supervised by Johannes Küchler for your PhD studies. I hope that is all right. Tanja wrote it down, and I'm just reading it, and remembering, of course, that we met. And more about your academic background. I'm now handing over to Tanja.
Yeah, thank you, Sigrun. Thank you, Sigrun. And there are some more information about our speaker today. Professor Martin Welp holds a professorship in social economics and communication at the Eberswalde University of Sustainable Development. He is the head of the International Master Study Program, Global Change Management, and a member of the Center for Econics and Ecosystem Management. He earned his doctoral degree at the Technische Universität Berlin, as said, with a comparative study on environment and development planning in 3 biosphere reserves. Before his current position, he worked as senior researcher at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, PIC, Department Global Change and Social Systems. His current research project is social ecological transformation agroforestry systems and energy efficient building focus on Central and South Asia. So dear Martin, we are very glad to have you here today and looking forward to a presentation with the name, The Role of Green Infrastructure in Designing Climate Resilient Cities and Increasing Human Well-Being. And we are looking forward for the discussion afterwards. So please.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Thanks for the kind words. Thanks also, Sigrun, and I'm happy to see many colleagues here I haven't seen for a while, also from China and from southern Germany. I will share my screen, which should be this one. Can you give me a short note if this is the correct? You can see it well.
Yes, all there.
Great, many thanks. Right, as Tanya explained, I'm in Eberswalde, which is about 60 kilometers northeast of Berlin, a place where forestry-related research started about 200 years ago, almost 200 years ago. And since 1992, there has been a University of Applied Sciences, and since about 7 years, we are the University for Sustainable Development, which surely is not greenwashing. Our study programs and our research has been very much focusing on natural resources management and rural development. But of course, when we talk about rural development, you should not omit the role of cities. And that's why I also like to work at the fringe of sort of rural, urban, peri-urban regions and try to also research the interconnectedness of these two. Tanya mentioned the Center for Econics and Ecosystem Management. Maybe I should briefly explain what the idea of econics is. You may be aware of bionics, which has the idea of learning from natural materials like the famous lotus flower or surfaces that can be used in industrial productions. And the idea of econics is that we actually learn from natural systems. So we analyze how do natural systems work, use this as an inspiration also for social systems and for how resilient and sustainable social systems can work. Right, and I'm heading the master's study program Global Change Management. So the smallest university in Brandenburg is managing global change, but we are very much, we're an international group of students. We talk a lot about systems thinking and trying to analyze global change on a global level, which however requires also that we sometimes zoom down to, for example, a city or a district in a city, like last Friday when we visited the Mierendorf Island in Berlin. Very interesting place. I will come back to it in a minute. Right, we do applied research. So when we do research on agroforestry systems or ecosystem services in urban and peri-urban areas, it's very much done in collaboration and cooperation with different stakeholder groups. And we also try to develop methods by which we can facilitate dialogues and systems thinking among scholars who do not necessarily speak the same jargon or disciplinary jargon. So creating this language and opportunities to make sense together is very much at the core of our research as well. So how we can bring together different knowledge bases. I actually renamed slightly my presentation. Instead of designing, which sort of sounds like architecture or design aspects, I wrote co-creating. We do have also some projects together with architects at the TU Berlin also on energy efficient housing with using natural materials. I think for this presentation, actually co-creation fits very well. And my examples are from Northwest China, as was mentioned already, but also research projects that we have had here in Eberswalde, Berlin, and Brandenburg. Some projects have been finished already that I will show to you. Some are ongoing and some are very much in the beginning. And at this point, I would like to thank my close collaborators from the Xinjiang University, Professor Dr. Ümit Halik, also TU alumni, and PhD students Abdullah Ablis, Shilei, and Pinray Chen, a former student of mine, with whom we have done interesting projects on urban forests. Right, and when we sort of look at Northwest China and Northeast Germany, there are some similarities, of course, a lot of differences as well. But when we talk about climate adaptation and making resilient cities, I mean, sort of switching between these two places, I find it very inspiring. So I try to switch to the next slide here. I would first talk a bit more broadly about social ecological transformations, then point out to the need of seeing urban areas and rural areas not only detached and separate, but very much as a continuum, where sort of a transit approach makes very much sense. And then talk about ecosystem services, the role of urban green and how this contributes to human well-being, which we can measure in very different ways. GDP, not a very good way of measuring well-being. On national level, you have a lot of indices, and actually that's something that in the study program we deal in the first course of what is actually human well-being. And well, in the discussion part of my presentation, I'm happy to also dive deeper into the concept of human well-being. Right, and then I would like to show some examples from Northwest China, Northeast Germany, and then come to my conclusions. And after that, I'm very happy to discuss with you any points that you find interesting. So, talking first about urbanization, for the Urbanics audience, I don't have to speak too much about the importance and the necessity of urban transformations, and also the necessity to create resilient cities. And this might mean in different places very different things. In a research project we had in India, Philippines, and Indonesia, there's a picture from a stakeholder dialogue in Puri in India. This was very much connected to sea level rise, extreme storm events, etc., and how Puri can prepare for this. Obviously, the problems in a non-coastal area of Xinjiang are very different, but still we are in a way talking about same things. How can we find those leverage points in a very complex system of an urban environment with very many different actors to make these cities more resilient and also make them more sustainable, reduce the footprint that these cities are causing. So in the research project that we had together with German Watch, a partner of our study program, we also looked at Gurgaon, close to New Delhi, and there the questions were very much related to mitigation of climate change. And these aspects or questions of mitigation and adaptation sometimes are interconnected, sometimes there might be trade-offs, but also a lot of synergies that you can find between mitigation and adaptation. So the German Advisory Council on Global Change has been thinking about urbanization as well in their flagship report a couple of years ago, Humanity on the Move, the unlocking the transformative power of cities. And I think that indeed, since urbanization is taking place very rapidly, there is a great opportunity also in making cities more not only resilient, but also reduce the footprint. And here on this graph, we see how one way of measuring human well-being, the Human Development Index, when the Human Development Index goes up, actually the ecological footprint tends to go also up steeply. Depending, and here we have on the colors, the urbanization level. And well, this curve needs to be changed, flattened in a way. This is one of the challenges we are facing. And when we talk about urbanization and, well, sustainability, very famous approach are the planetary boundaries, showing that when we look at climate change, we are very much approaching a zone of where we are beyond the zone of uncertainty. So we are coming closer to high risks. We are already in a high risk zone when we look at biosphere integrity, so biodiversity loss, etc. Also in terms of biochemical flows like nitrogen, we are beyond. So many challenges, and also these are interconnected. And when at the University for Sustainable Development, we talk about sustainability, we actually do not speak about the 3 pillars of sustainability, social, ecological, environmental, but rather we refer to something like the wedding cake approach, where we see that actually the social systems are very deeply embedded into the biosphere, the ecological systems. So this is the basis of all. Without a functioning ecosystem, we would not have a functioning society or an economic system. So embeddedness of the social systems in ecosystems, this is the basis for human well-being. We can look at this on a global, very global level, but also we can look at this embeddedness on a very local level, like city or a part of a city, where these ecosystem services also are the basis for human well-being. And we have seen this during heat waves, like in India and Pakistan in recent weeks. We have seen it during the times of pandemic, where suddenly urban green has played a very different role than previously, and led partly to overuse of this ecosystem basis of human well-being. Right. Inspired by these approaches is a concept which some of you may be aware of, the so-called idea of a donut economy, where we also have the safe operating space for our social and ecological systems, like the environmental ceiling. And this resembles quite a bit the planetary boundaries approach, where we have climate change, land use change, biodiversity loss, etc. But the interesting thing about donut economy is that actually we do have here the social foundation of what we call sustainable development. And this social foundation, which is income, education, jobs, voice, energy, social equity, gender equality, health, etc. This is sort of the basis for the safe and just space for humanity to operate. And the interesting thing is that this can be transferred in numbers. You can measure these things. And scholars like Kate Rowford and others have tried to actually measure to what extent are we within the limits of the environmental ceiling, to what extent are we already, do we have this social foundation? This is the idea of the donut economy. And again, great challenges ahead of us when we look at the biophysical boundaries that have been transgressed, like countries in Germany or my former country, Finland. which are here in the upper right corner. And then we have here the social threshold that has been achieved. We see that actually not a single country is actually simultaneously meeting the social foundation while staying within the environmental ceiling. And okay, you can ask, this is a very global approach, but it does not have to be. Actually, cities like Amsterdam have been used this for visioning sustainable Amsterdam, and there are other cities as well. We have been doing some activities on the Mierendorf Island, part of Charlottenburg in Berlin, and I will come to this a bit later on. Here we see the Mierendorf Island. So how is it possible to actually use this very global approach to part of Berlin? Here we see the limits of Berlin with the different districts. Here we have Charlottenburg-Wilmersdorf, and a tiny island with about 16,000 inhabitants. This is the sustainable Mierendorf, or the Mierendorf Island, and there is a very interesting project called Sustainable Mierendorf Island. It's surrounded by water, and that's why the island character gives sort of a further label to this initiative. So is it possible to translate such an approach to a small part of the city, which is very diverse? We do have allotment gardens, green spaces, we do have waterways, which play an important role when we talk about climate adaptation and the heat island effect. We do have industrial areas, traffic infrastructure, railroads, a former coal plant, gas power plant here, and then sort of housing areas of different kinds from different era, from the beginning of the century, but also from built in 1960s, etc. Okay, I will come to this a bit later. I highlighted the point that I see the necessary need to actually look at urban-rural transformations jointly, and I will give you some examples here. So this is Berlin, and it's surrounded by the federal state of Brandenburg, where our university is located. And well, the examples I'm going to show you are from forest fire areas in Troin-Brietzen, where we, as Center for Econics, have research projects ongoing. The challenge of how to manage forests dominated by pine forests, which is actually not the natural type of vegetations you would have here. What to do with? Interesting question, relevant question, also in terms of water availability of the surrounding agricultural areas and the city itself. Then we do have the Mierendorf Island with the idea of donut economy. Can we translate this into a local action? We have had a project in Bernau, which is like a suburban area, growing very fast. Actually, both places in Berlin, Mierendorf Island is growing, fastest growing district. In fact, Bernau has been growing. We have had a project on climate adaptation there, a few slides about that. And this is actually Eberswalde in the northeast, in the district of Barning. So, and looking at these with students, we do excursions to all these places, and actually always highlight that we cannot see these things separately. But let's first start with China. This is the China lunch, and I would like to start talking about Northwest China, Xinjiang. And indeed, there are some interesting similarities, of course, many different differences, but like one thing which connects us both thematically is water availability. Even though Berlin and Brandenburg, on the first glance, have quite a bit of water areas, rivers, channels, lakes, etc., we are in the driest, one of the driest regions in Germany, which is expected to have water problems in future, in 2050. All regional climate models show that there will be prolonged drought periods, prolonged heat periods, and the groundwater level is going down. For example, on the Mierendorf Island, about 1 meter in recent few years. We have had very dry and hot summers. 2018, 19, 2020 was also quite dry. When we look at China, northwest China, we do have the great water tower there, the Tian Shan Mountains, which are providing at the moment water at the right time for the irrigation agriculture, for production of cotton and other agricultural crops, to have oasis cities which without these water tower could not exist there. And in fact, with climate change, we all are aware what is happening with glaciers. They are melting, and this can mean that in the beginning we do have more water. The question is, do we have the right amount of water at the right period, growing period in the agricultural cycle? But in the long term, the region is likely to face big challenges, because when the water tower, the water reservoirs are gone, the precipitation levels might slightly increase due to climate change, but we are talking about very arid regions there. So the water question definitely is something that connects us both. And my talk sort of not only focuses on urban green, but it's one big part of it. And urban green clearly has many benefits, starting with physical well-being. In the context of Xinjiang, urban green plays a very important role in terms of dust protection. And actually the examples I'm going to show you are partly connected to this dust problem. We do not have a severe dust problem in Berlin and Brandenburg at the moment, but with increasing erosion and drought, we might also face maybe not as serious problems as in Xinjiang, which is a sort of a desert area, but the vegetation is changing. And the challenge is really, can we keep a forested landscape outside of Berlin, which is then contributing to groundwater recharge, which is avoiding erosion, etc. Well, heat island effect is clearly one further aspect. We have had very hot days here in Berlin last weeks, which has become sort of the new normal as well. But when we talk about urban green, the cultural dimension should not be omitted. Having points of identification, old trees, old parks, feeling sort of feeling the continuity and locality, though this is the place where I live, I can connect with these environments. We do have places where people can meet and socialize. In that sense, the social dimensions play an important role. Simply having places where people can meet, not below the hot sun, but having shady places. And these are the parks, these are the trees on streets, etc. And of course, we're talking also about learning laboratories for environmental education. If school children don't have greenery around, where do you show young people that there is a value of these urban, very artificial ecosystems, which, however, contribute to human well-being? Well, in our research, together with Untitled and others, also Ahmad Chan, I would like to mention here, is the dust stress. And in Aksu, one of the cities we have been doing research, there are many days in a year where you have either severe or moderate dust stress coming from the being at the fringe of Taklamakan desert. And Ümit Halik have been researching the dust retention potential of different tree species, of how they are structured and how they are combined in an urban environment. All this needs water, obviously, and in the urban greenery, a lot of alien species have been used, which are not particularly water efficient, and that's why one of the key findings is that actually pay attention to the type of vegetations, which should not only be decorative plants, but actually should fulfill also other functions, like the dust retention that is in focus here. And it was also a focus in a shelter belt project that we have been analyzing from a sustainability point of view, sustainability in terms of economics, social aspects, and also environmental aspects. Already in the 1980s, the city of Aksu decided to construct a shelter belt forest, which is a great example of the interconnectedness of urban and rural areas. It was just like a desert plateau, and with a lot of infrastructure, a lot of machinery, a lot of manpower, this was converted into a, again, artificial agroforestry systems with orchards, with white poplar rows, giving additional protection, and protected the city from dust storms, which took place in particular in April and May of each year. And this sounds like a great idea, and in a way it was a great idea. It provided a lot of job employment for the local farmers, which are growing apples, pears, vegetables, etc., selling it on local markets, and as a side effect, providing these ecosystem services. However, we need to be aware of the trade-offs. There are a lot of synergies, but also trade-offs. And one of the trade-offs is that also this system needs water, which is lacking somewhere because water is a scarce resource. And this is sort of a case in point for what can be called a translocation of ecosystem services, where we do have the Aksu River coming from the Tian Shan Mountains, the water tower of Xinjiang, also the water tower of the countries west of Tian Shan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, etc. And we know from the RLC example what has happened if mismanagement of water resources takes place. Well, this has not the same magnitudes, but serves as a case in point. This is the Tarim River. When we divert, or we have the natural Tugai forest, like a natural poplar vegetation at the middle and lower ends of the Tarim River, and then we divert water from the Aksu River and create an artificial agroforestry shelter belt project, the Kökiar shelter belt forest, which needs water. Somewhere the water is lacking, and this causes to die back in the lower ends of the Tarim River. So this is what we call then the translocation of ecosystem services, like we are trading natural riparian forest for the benefit of urban inhabitants for this shelter belt plantation. We have prospering white poplar as a trade-off dying Euphrates poplar at the lower end. Of course, this shelter belt project is not the only and major user of water. the cotton production, the agricultural production is using most of the water, but still we sort of calculated what amount of forest could we have if we would use the water not here, but actually at the lower ends, and roughly a rough estimate would be that we would have like a double the size of forest, natural forest, if water would be used there. Of course, for AXU, this is an important contribution and is contributing to the dust problem, but also to the urban heat island effect, which is another problem and challenge also in cities like AXU, but also in cities like Berlin and the fringes of it. Okay, which brings me to the sort of the ways how we actually design cities. This is an interesting approach, maybe for the challenge how new cities should be built. And in China, actually, this is maybe a bigger issue than in Germany, where actually new cities are being planned. Redesigning or sort of, redesigning cities is a more challenging problem because the infrastructure, the constructions is there, but it makes sense to have a look at how cities were built in previous times in Xinjiang. This is sort of the pre-industrial type of city with much more urban vegetation, different systems of transportation and housing. In the sort of early periods of industrialization, it was also densely built, quite a lot of green infrastructure there as well. But when we go to the present types, or this would be also a picture from the early periods of industrialization, narrow roads, having vertical structures of greenery, etc. But when we then look at modern cities in Urumqi, the picture is quite different, and the energy, traffic infrastructure, the type of how it's being built, of course there are also parks, etc., makes the heat island effect and all the negative aspects of individual transportation a very, very big problem. And this is, of course, not only a problem in Xinjiang and Urumqi, but also other cities in the world. And we have had an interesting exercise with a student of mine, Pinray Chen, using the Marisco approach, which is an effort to look at human well-being, the ecosystem services, the social services, but also the ecosystems and social systems from a systems point of view, trying to make a model of it. And Pinray Chen used this for a case in Taipei, and we had a virtual event also with the Forest Research Institute there, trying to look at the stresses to urban ecosystems, what are the threats to urban ecosystems, what are the contributing factors. You see that always at the end of this systems approach and systems mapping exercise is then human well-being. There's a website, marisco.training, where you will find more information about one tool that can be used to make sense of these kind of complex interactions, which I see some strange blue stripes here. I hope this is not disturbing. Okay, and we have tried this in different, this has been used in protected areas, it has been used in urban environments, we have used it to study agroforestry systems, a very good tool to come into discussing with different stakeholders systemic relationships between ecosystems and social systems. And this would be sort of the outcome of the exercise for Taipei, where we have the human well-being, the ecosystem services, the urban forest ecosystems, different types of them, and how governance plays an important role in managing these urban forests. Okay, I think my time is running. I need to come to the end of my presentation, but a couple of slides about the examples in Berlin. So what we are sort of starting is trying to figure out the idea of donut economy. You remember the ecological ceiling and the social foundation for a sustainable district, not only looking from a global perspective, but very local also. What does it mean? What does this ecological ceiling mean for an island such as Mierendorf, where we do have these important axes, like actually it's possible to walk around Mierendorf Island. This is public space, very important in times of COVID-19, for example. We do have these green and blue corridors from north to west, but also west-east axis, which are important when you think of the airflows, cool airflows from the north to Charlottenburg, which is here very densely inhabited in the south, and the allotment gardens, which play an important role as well for not only for the managers of these spaces, but also for the surrounding environment. Well, the blues tribes are still here in Bernau. One of the examples in Berlin, this is sort of at the fringe. We have been looking at climate adaptation. There's a good documentation on this website. I can provide the website, the presentation to the TU Center and TU Berlin, so that you can check the links. And we, of course, know that these sealed areas with a lot of with little vegetation are the ones which heat up in the city. We see here sort of the heat camera satellite images. This is Berlin. The forested areas are much lower. Agricultural areas tend to be very hot as well. And the type of building, also the suburban areas with not a lot of greenery, industrial areas combined with heat, combined with drought, leads to these kind of pictures in the Bernau area. Actually, today, our city, Eberswalde, is thinking about climate resilience. There is a meeting which I cannot visit, but the city is starting, and cities are starting to work on ideas of resilience. In this study on Barnim, we actually look at the different spatial planning tools, which are very complex in the German context, and had a look to what extent is climate adaptation taking into account there. And actually the outcome was that climate change, ecosystem functionality, risk management was not in a good way taken into account in these different spatial planning procedures. Well, agricultural areas, I told you, heat up. They consume a lot of water, referring to research that we have done in Central Asia on agroforestry systems, and particularly sort of tree shelter belts, is something that actually has great potential also for Brandenburg. This is a picture actually from Central Asia, but principally the same idea matters here. With Niels Tift, we have been doing research on the role of these tree shelter belts, agroforestry systems that existed also in Eastern Germany, but which have been cut down in the phase of industrialization. And when we do have reduced wind speeds, we also have reduced water use of the whole system, the agricultural crops. This is not only important for agricultural production, but also for Berlin, because water is scarce, and we need to make strategic choices, actually, where to use water, where to save water, and these agroforestry systems are one way of saving water in the agricultural systems. Going down south of Berlin, this is Treuenbrietzen. I talked about the pine forests, and that these are actually going up in fire. Not all of them, obviously, but we have had quite severe forest fires in Treuenbrietzen a couple of weeks ago, and this is increasingly becoming a problem. What comes up here, interestingly, is poplar. A poplar which so far has not played an important role in forestry in Germany. It was sort of considered to be crap wood. But we have to also consider what kind of forests are we actually going to have in future, what kind of forests are going to survive, so that we actually do have forest in the first place to secure water recharge, groundwater recharge, which is so important also for Berlin. And this is actually one of the main issues, which is one of the main issues for foresters also in the forested parts of Berlin. Okay, actually, I will going to skip a few slides so that we have time for discussions. These are just examples of community, examples of urban greenery from Tempelhofer Feld, but also the allotment gardens I mentioned, which do have a lot of common in terms of their institutional arrangements with Elinor Ostrom's Common Pool Resources Management, but which are providing, again, as a side effect, very important ecosystem services. One problem, not a new issue really, but is that when we talk about urban vegetation, there are many different agencies which are in charge of it, also private actors, public actors, and important is that we do have cooperation between these agencies and that we do have cooperation and dialogue between the private actors, urban developers, and well, Berliner Forsten, who are managing the forested areas of Berlin, and then the administration for urban greenery. My very last slide, conclusions, I would like to boil down some of the main points. So cities are starting to develop long-term strategies to increase resilience, like in Eberswalde today, like Bernau in this Pro-Bernau project, or Mierendorf Island. But this needs to take speed and it needs to become more systemic. We need to include more systems thinking into it, and I would highlight that methods such as MARISC tool, it's not the only one, but this is something that we have been using and testing in many parts of the world, actually on all continents, in biosphere reserved urban areas. This is an available and well-tested tool to increase interagency cooperation, stakeholder dialogues, strategic decision-making. And Urban Green obviously plays an important role in terms of their ecosystem services, but not only, also in terms of their social services, the strengthening of community building and sense of locality. And with this slide, I would like to thank you for your attention and thank for all colleagues at the Center for Econics and Ecosystem Management for their contributions, and in particularly for my colleagues at the Xinjiang University, with whom we have had long-term cooperation and currently exchange of PhD students. So thanks a lot, and I'm happy to discuss questions that you may have.